All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Oglesby, the committee manager with the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. We're so excited to have you all join us today for our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee program, Breaking Barriers, How to See and Celebrate Diversity in the Workplace. I am going to pass it over to Dave Della Terza, our DEI committee chair, for our introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Della Terza. I'm the Executive Director at Naperville Public Library, and I'm this year's chair of the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We've been working to provide some high-quality programming and educational resources for the community for just about a year now, and it's really great to see all the interest around the topics of DEI. At our last event in February, Judge Vincent Cornelius talked about diversity in the workplace and shared his 5 S's: see, speak, stand, stay, and study. At this month's program, we're going to focus on the first S, which is C. Dr. Stephen Caliendo from North Central College will be facilitating the program's discussion about how we talk about and how we acknowledge diversity in the workplace. And he's going to be taking us through an exercise to explore diversity and social identity. I'd also like to thank SICICH as the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee sponsor for the year. And now I will hand things over to Mina Banashak, who will be our moderator for this program.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you to everyone who has joined us this afternoon. Is it afternoon yet? It's close. Maybe you're joining us from a different time zone too. At any rate, we're happy to have you. Happy Earth Day. As Linda and Dave have started to mention and describe, our event today is called Breaking Barriers, How to See and Celebrate Diversity in the Workplace. And Linda, if you could bump us one slide forward, please. You should all be seeing some content on the screen. That's perfect. Thank you. So I wanted to take just a quick minute to explain why this is the topic that we've chosen, why we're going to go through a bit of an interactive exercise here. And what we really fundamentally hope is that each individual is able to obtain some new insights about yourself, first and foremost, about things that you may not have previously considered or not thought about as deeply when it comes to diversity and how that manifests in you, and to develop a curiosity and an empathy for how others would respond to some of the same questions that we're going to pose. The purpose really is to reflect and be introspective and be better able to have rich, meaningful conversations with your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, whoever. And we hope that that starts right here in this discussion and with the folks who have all come together to participate. Again, I want to introduce Dr. Stephen Caliendo. He is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at North Central College. We are thrilled to have him here with us to help us with this conversation. He is a first-generation college student. He holds a Ph.D. in political science from Purdue University, and he focuses his research in the areas of political communication and political psychology. He is author, co-author, or co-editor of 5 books, and his research has been presented at major conferences and published in leading specialized academic journals and encyclopedias. Dr. Caliendo is a regular analyst for international, national, state, and local media outlets. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to him to tell you a little bit more about who he is, what his career path has been, and just generally introduce himself.
Thank you, Mina. Thanks to the Chamber and certainly to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for putting together this series and for inviting me to take part in it. I hope I can be a little bit helpful to the folks that are here who gathered to try to reflect more on these issues and push forward to make our workplaces more inclusive and more equitable. I won't spend a lot of time on myself, but I know it's important to sort of set the context so you know who you're interacting with. But I'm a little uncomfortable saying, making this about me. But I grew up outside of Pittsburgh. I was, as Mina pointed out, I'm a first-generation college student, so that probably characterizes some of you in the room as well. There was always an expectation that I would go to college, even though my folks did not, but I didn't have a lot of guidance because they weren't able to in terms of where I should go. I ended up choosing a state school in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a robust what was historically been a robust state system, 14 colleges and universities in addition to the flagship schools. I say historically because it's in the news recently that some of those schools are probably going to have to merge, including the one that I attended, Clarion University of Pennsylvania. I had about 6,000 undergraduates at the time that I went there. And then I moved to the Midwest for my graduate work. I did a master's and a Ph.D. at Purdue University in political science. When I was an undergraduate, I went for English literature. And I always think it was fascinating. My parents didn't push me away from that. And I see oftentimes first generation North Central College has a rich history of educating first gen students as well. And we were very successful. But I've noticed recently, parents of first gen students are really gearing them away from the traditional liberal arts and more toward what they perceive to be valuable pre-professional opportunities. And my folks were just so happy I was going to college. They didn't care what I was majoring in. So they were happy with the English literature degree, and it really has served me well. But I chose to study political science in graduate school. And I had visiting position at University of Missouri St. Louis, and then I was in a tenure track position at Avila University in Kansas City before I landed here in 2005 on the faculty, and I've been Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here since 2016 when we restructured under this new model. I've been interested in inequality as a social construct since I was a teenager. I sort of came up as a competitive skateboarder, and punk rock music was important to me. A lot of those themes emerged there. Hip hop music in the early 1980s. Messages there that caught my attention. And so there was a curiosity there. I didn't begin to study it formally until 2001. So after I was out of graduate school, when I met Dr. Charlton McElwain, who was vice provost at New York University at the time. He was a graduate student and at University of Oklahoma. And we began to study race and politics together. So I just this morning, as I was thinking about this, it's like the 20-year anniversary that we've been working together. So I guess I must tell you, we started doing that when we were 8 years old, because I don't feel like I should have been studying anything for 20 years. So this has been my primary area of focus, race and ethnicity in particular, but inequality generally. I have a textbook on inequality in America that tries to take a more intersectional approach and includes gender as well as race and ethnicity in a relatively slim volume designed for undergraduates. So I hope that catches you up, on my path and sort of what I'm coming to you with today. And I'm happy to help engage with you all during the session.
Thank you, Dr. Caliendo. Now, I did want to mention to everybody who's attending today that we are recording this session. You may have noticed a little icon in the top part of your screen. I hope that doesn't necessarily sway you from still wanting to participate and share your thoughts and your questions. Please know that the chat is open for that activity as well, if you have thoughts or comments that come to mind as we get into this conversation. And then a little bit later, we're going to conduct an activity that will move us into breakout rooms. So you'll automatically be assigned to a smaller group to have a bit more of an intimate discussion. Those breakout rooms will not be recorded. So we hope that does encourage you to feel a little bit more free to share your thoughts openly and have a good dialogue with your fellow participants. So moving on from that technical detail, I want to refer back to something that Dave De La Terza introduced to us when he spoke a few minutes ago, which is that the basis for this event stems from the 5 S's, or call to action, that Judge Cornelius shared with us. And that first S was the word see. And the title for this event and what we want to really dig into is what does it mean to see diversity? And I'm gonna read Judge Cornelius's words just to help shape the first part of the conversation we're gonna have here. He said, "See my color. Understand that I need you to see my color. I can't afford to be colorblind, and in some instances, I can't afford for you to be colorblind. I need you to see the burden and the disadvantages that come into my life just because I'm Black." Now, in those instances where I used the word color and where I used the word Black, we very much should be ready to substitute a series of other words that demonstrate diversity, that this is not limited to race, but that it could apply to gender or sexual orientation or physical or neurodiversity or physical ability or disability, to a great number of different things. And the idea is that we want to enable each other and ourselves to better see diversity. But there's some apparent difficulty in being able to do that, and that's kind of the first question I want to throw to you, Dr. Caliendo. What is the right way to see and talk about diversity or equality or any inequality therein?
Mm. Yeah, and I think I didn't get a chance to participate when Judge Cornelius was here, but I've been briefed, and I'm really moved by his approach. And of course, as an English literature major, I like the alliteration involved in a 5 S's approach. It's beautiful, poetic, and it's powerful. And I should say too, I probably should have said during my bio that I identify as white. My last name is, it ends in a vowel, so I always try to be as upfront about that as I can. I'm Italian American. That's my heritage, a little bit Irish, but I'm white. And so when I speak from that perspective, and I acknowledge that in my daily life. And I think that's really what the judge is asking us to do. So he says to see his color. In other words, he's saying, the colorblind is not the goal. And I think that's hard for a lot of white folks to hear, because I think a lot of white folks were raised or came to believe that that's what it was all about. And really sort of a sanitized version of Martin Luther King, right? Where he's saying judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And if that's all you got from Martin Luther King, then it's understandable why you think colorblind is the goal. But of course, Martin Luther King Jr. was writing about a lot more than that. It was quite radical what he was writing. I think we sometimes conflate the fact that he was nonviolent with the notion that he wasn't radical. He absolutely was radical. He was radical in the sense that not as extremism, the way we use radical now, but of course, the etymology of the word radical, the rad means root. It means attacking problems by their root and looking at systems and not just being kind to each other, although that's, that's a lovely thing to do as well. So we want to see all of our color, including our own color for us white folks, that we have to recognize that white is a race, white is a color. And oftentimes we ignore that part, and we use words like diversity to really mean non-white. And that's problematic, because diversity is all the diversity. And the invisibility of privilege is really the heart of this problem. And so when the judge encourages us to see, and that first S that he puts forward, that's what we're focused on today, because seeing, acknowledging, reflecting, if we don't do that first, none of the other stuff's going to matter. It doesn't matter how many trainings you attend, how many books you read, unless we can be upfront about it and acknowledge what's in front of us and how the social construction of race has come to matter, particularly in the context of the United States.
Fantastic. Thank you. You said a number of things that I want to touch on a little bit more deeply. You said we can commonly find ourselves using the word diversity to mean non-white. And that's a big part of the activity we have planned for today, is to understand that diversity is a series of things that go well beyond color or race. So what kind of disadvantage do we find ourselves at if we prescribe to this colorblind concept? What else are we not seeing if we don't have that depth of vision?
Right, and I will expand your question toward where you started, which is it's about my gender too. It's about my sexual orientation. It's about my degree of able-bodiedness and all the other types of elements of my identity that might advantage or disadvantage me. And so what we lose out when we don't see is a recognition of how whatever privileges I might hold, and if we went around the room, and we will, in the identity wheel, we'll recognize that all of us have some sorts of privileges, and other places maybe we're in disadvantaged. But when we hold privilege, to the extent that it's invisible, to the extent that it's not seen not only by ourselves but acknowledged by others, then it can't be addressed. And that's really the problem about when we talk about systemic disadvantage, whether it's sexism or whether it's racism. It really is about the invisibility perpetuating and moving forward. We use the term hegemony, this sort of overarching kind of invisible feel of power that exists. And if we don't see it, then we can't address it. And so what we really lose by not focusing on the seeing part is our ability to meaningfully grapple with the history and then think through how that history informs what we're doing right now.
Got it. Thank you. So let's be a little bit more forward looking then toward kind of the outcome that we're hoping to achieve with this conversation as a first step, and talk about this phrase or this term, cultural competence. What does that mean? And how should that resonate with the group that's listening here today as we work through this series of exercises?
First, I want to say it's a process, it's hard not to be impatient. It's hard not to want to see a goal and then just achieve it. But if I can get anything through today, it's that for all of us in the room, irrespective of our multiple overarching identities, we should be on a journey together. A journey that's not going to stop, that's not going to end, the continual growth. And I know I sound like such a professor right now. I'm standing here in a tweed jacket telling you that you have a lifetime of learning ahead of you. I'm a caricature of myself, but I really mean it. And these issues in particular, we have to be open to the fact that we'll never know enough, that we'll never understand it completely enough, and that we continue to want to learn and listen and read and grow and talk. And so I start with that to say that it's not something to be achieved. It's not an endorsement that you can get and you earn a certificate and you can put it on you get a little LinkedIn badge or something and it's like, I'm culturally competent and I'm good. It's a process, and I think we need to sign on, although I'm certain that there probably are those kind of badges, but don't get too excited about having one because it really is a lifelong process. And I think this is true, I'm sure, for many of you in all parts of your life, whether it's a hobby that you have, if it's gardening or it's wine tasting or whatever. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. You know, the more you learn, the more you think, oh, well, now there's this whole other area that I've got to figure out. And if we can embrace that, even though it's uncomfortable, and learn to be as comfortable as possible with that discomfort, I think we'll be on a right path. The idea of this is to make our businesses better, to make them more successful, both in terms of finances and in the way we serve the public, but also to have equitable and inclusive working environments, places where you want to work so people will come, will stay, help have more meaningful conversations around the table, and then everybody's well-being is enhanced as a result of that. But it's hard work along the way. I don't mean to suggest, I wish I had some magic wand. We would have fixed this a long time ago. It's hard work.
Right. Yes. Thank you. I agree. It is very much a process. And, it's my hope that everyone who's attending today leaves this session feeling like they've taken a meaningful step on that process or on that journey or within that process. I keep alluding to this activity that we're going to do. And so we're going to start to transition over to that here pretty soon. So Linda, if I could ask you to bump us forward one slide again, please, on the screen. Thank you. So, we're talking about topics that can commonly present themselves as being challenging or complex or, not something that we have a great deal of comfort discussing in large groups or small. And given that, and given the kind of introspection and sharing that we want to stimulate in this session among the group who's here, we are going to do a little bit of practice. And so we've got a warm-up activity here first. And I do also want to mention that for the next activity, it would be helpful if you happen to have a pen or pencil and a sheet of paper available, or if you're at a computer, you can just pull up a blank Word document or just anywhere where you can type some or jot some notes down. That will be helpful just to help collect your thoughts. But right now, this one is meant to be pretty low key, and what we're looking for you to do as a participant is share something about yourself, specifically 2 adjectives, the first 2 adjectives that come to mind to describe yourself, or you can use 2 of the personal identities that are shown here on this wheel. So we're talking about the concept of a personal identity as described by these various characteristics going around the wheel, because we're going to get into discussing the difference between these and social identities in a little bit. So I encourage you to use the chat and go ahead and drop something right in the chat. Just pick 2 adjectives to describe yourself. That'll help you introduce yourself to the group here, or 2 of the personal identities as well. And I will offer something of my own. I will say that my favorite color is purple, and my phone is ringing, and that is not on the slide, side note. And in terms of number of siblings, I am the younger of 2. So go ahead.
Do you want me to do that too, Mina?
Please do, yeah.
I'm such a stereotype. Sometimes my favorite food is pizza. I can't help it. It is. Honestly, the reason I'll pick this one, a skill that I'm proud of, is my writing. But the reason I'm pointing that out is because I need to be better. I just sent a manuscript out for a third edition of a textbook, and it's going to come back from a copy editor with a lot of red ink on it, right? And it's humbling because I'm a pretty good writer, but I'm going to be a better writer as a result of interacting with that copy editor. And so, again, looking for those places where we can continue to improve, even in the places that we're proud of.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for the reflection on your descriptors as well. So I see some really great ideas coming through in the chat, lots of favorite colors being shared, and the answers are not all the same. They're quite different, and that's beautiful. It shows that we have a diverse group here on the call, and people are choosing different personal identities to discuss. So not everyone is answering the same exact question. They're working their way around the wheel. I really love, I love the sharing here. Thank you for that. Chocolate chip cookies, wonderful. So what I want to encourage you to do as you're watching these words and phrases and answers come through is think about what it stirs up in you as you see them. Do they make you curious to know a little bit more about that person whose name maybe you've never seen before because you see something that you can instantly relate to? Or do you see something that you would never have expected to see as a response to a certain question that is markedly different from how you might answer it? And does that make you curious to learn a little bit more? There's so much you can do to dive into a rich conversation, just starting from something as reasonably simple as 2 adjectives to describe yourself. So with this exercise, please continue to drop stuff in the chat as ideas come to mind, but I am going to ask Linda to move us to the next slide. And pretty soon here, we're going to cut over into our breakout rooms. But I do want to introduce this activity. This is really kind of the core of our session today. And what we're looking to do is to explain this concept of social identity. It is something different from what we just presented as personal identity. Social identity groups are based on physical, social, and mental characteristics of individuals. So you see a variety of categories or identities that are listed on the screen here. And I should also mention that the sources for all of the content and the concepts that we're presenting here today come from a combination of work from North Central College and from the University of Michigan. And we will share a link to the original source from University of Michigan because there's lots of really great stuff on that webpage for you to explore. So you can work your way around this wheel and just familiarize yourself with the types of things that are listed as social identities. Some of these are obvious, apparently obvious and clear as to how someone might identify. Sometimes it's not at all obvious or clear. Dr. Caliendo offered that he's an Italian American. I might have been able to guess that, or I might have had no idea until he openly admitted it. A lot of these identities are self-claimed. You identify as being something within each of those categories, but they're not always announced. It's not something that you necessarily print out on a label and tape to your shirt and walk around telling everyone. Some of these might be more private. And a lot of them can be ascribed by other people and assigned to you, whether correctly or incorrectly. It's the basis for a lot of assumptions and judgments and preconceived notions. And we're starting to get into a little bit of this, the concept of unconscious bias that can creep in when you assign your understanding of someone else's social identity to them, and then start wondering, well, what does that mean about who they are as a person? This is all very natural in terms of how we interact as human beings in our society. The point of this exercise here is for you first to work around this wheel and jot down how you identify within each of these categories. And the next slide, Linda, if you could scroll down a bit further, does list several examples, none of which you might be satisfied with, and that is totally fine. It is not comprehensive, but it gives you an idea of what each of those terms is referring to. And you might choose to identify or write down something completely different from what's on this list. This is just a starting point. So what we're going to do now is split off into our breakout groups, and each breakout room will have a facilitator from the DE&I committee. So thank you to the team who's going to be helping to run this exercise. You'll have a few minutes to sit with this wheel and the list of examples, and then within your smaller groups, your facilitators will start to ask you a few questions to explore what you've written down. So as we're preparing to switch to breakouts, now is a good time to get that pen and paper and put your thinking caps on. Oh, I think that might be Linda who's joined us. Is that Linda?
It is.
Hello, welcome. With running so much behind the scenes, I hope you yourself are also able to participate to some extent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mina. Yep. Just making sure
Good.
everyone is good to go.
Yes, yeah. And so right now we're just taking some time for folks to jot down how they would identify with each of these identities on the wheel. And I will say we have a generous amount of time here. We'll have a good amount of time for some small group discussion, and then breakouts should return to the main room at about 12:35.
12:35. Great. I was just hopping over here to ask you when you would like me to tell everyone, but now I know. I think there is a 60-second countdown, so I'll probably send the message at 34 that we'll be returning to the main room in
Perfect.
a minute.
Yep, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina.
All right, so how are we doing? Do we need a few more minutes to finish jotting some answers down? Show me a thumbs up or use your thumbs up icon on Zoom if you're good. Good, got some confirmation. Thank you, Andrew, you're good. Sarah's good, awesome. All right, so I'm going to scroll down and on the screen now you should see some questions, and this is going to help drive our discussion and our dialogue here. But really what it starts with is if anyone is willing to and comfortable to share an example or two of what they wrote down on their wheel. You could choose any one of the identities. All right. We are working our way back to the main room. Hope everybody had a nice opportunity to have a bit of a small group discussion. Thank you again to our breakout room facilitators. And we are back in the main room, and again, we are resuming the recording of the session just to go through our kind of post-activity reflections and a little bit more discussion. And we do also have the opportunity for Q&A. So if any of you attendees have questions on your mind or comments that you want to pose to the larger group, please do throw those in the chat and we can pull those in and direct them as needed. So the first thing that I would like to do is center on this slide and the questions here that Linda's got on the screen. Thank you, Linda. I hope that each of you in your breakout rooms had a chance to start to get into a discussion on these questions. As you jotted down your responses to the various identities on the wheel, which of those do you find that you're constantly aware of and you think about the most, compared to those that you perhaps have never really considered at all and have not had a reason to, and why would that be? So I'd like to ask if any of the breakout room facilitators could share a quick highlight from some of the discussion that happened. You do not need to share names, but just ideas and comments that were presented. Is there anyone that can offer something up?
Hey, Mina, it's Carlos. I'll start first.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, thanks. The one thing that we all kept talking about was ageism. You know, how, you know, somebody who is very young, who has accomplished a lot, is being told, oh, you're only successful because of your youthfulness. But yet some of us are middle-aged and don't consider ourselves middle-aged, and just how the world perceives us now. You know, some have kids and their perception of how they were raised. So just the things that most of us don't think about until you are, you know, presented in those cases. So that was like the one main topic in our breakout room that just, you know, we really had a very good discussion of what that meant. And I'll let the groups, if they want to share anything personal, that they can. So thanks.
Yes, thank you, Carlos.
I'll jump in.
Sure.
Okay, so my group, we had a fantastic conversation, and you know, a couple of things came out. One was the influence of our experiences in our childhood and shifting that perception and shifting that identity is a lot harder to swallow or a lot harder to acknowledge. And the other thing that we were talking about was, you know, having it be, you know, being your authentic self and showing up in a consistent and continuous manner, and just, you know, having the courage to address things. And then lastly, the identities we weren't thinking about, you know, that the ones that we thought about the least. It was really about, if you were in a privileged group, for example, if you are a white man, or if you are a straight, you know, gender and sexual orientation of what you were born as, then it's almost like you don't have to think about it. So really taking the time to pause and realize that you may be coming from a place of privilege, which means you need to listen. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's very profound. Thank you so much. It sounds like a fantastic dialogue in that room. Thank you, Alexis. We're gonna go a little bit deeper into that word privilege that you mentioned, and marginalization as well. Anyone else excited to share something that came up in conversation?
Yeah,
Maybe look for one more.
Yeah, I can share. One of the interesting ones that came up in our group was language. We talked about, we had one group member who was from a different country, and how English being a second language, you know, that was something that came to the forefront coming to the US. And we had one group member that was learning another language and trying to, you know, immerse herself in another language because she likes to consume a lot of media in another language. We talked about how, you know, surrounding yourself with people who speak that language or in that culture can sometimes really improve and trying to learn the language and trying to really learn more about that, what it is that you're interested in. And then some of the things that we said were not as prevalent were the two that came up a lot were religion and sexual orientation, because we had a lot of group members that said, being Christian, a lot of people in this country are Christian, being straight, a lot of people in this country who are straight, you don't think about it as much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. So it sounds like there's been a lot of really insightful dialogue centering on these questions first, of course, as far as which identities come through the most and which come through the least. I want to turn it back to Dr. Caliendo to comment on this question on the side here. As it relates to privilege and marginalization to some degree, so I'd like him to speak to that as well. But what does it mean to have a strong sense of your own social identities in the way that it can help you bring your whole self to work? Dr. Caliendo, what would you say there?
Thank you, Mina. I think it's so much about putting in the work, and that starts with the recognition. And that exercise we did, I hope everybody felt like they got a lot out of it. It's short, but it's powerful. I've been through it a number of times. I feel like I learned something about myself a little different every time, and certainly about the people in my group. There's a real ability here for growth in all of us, but it only happens when you acknowledge it. There's folks on the call who are sort of physical fitness buffs, and they understand that you have to have a goal, you have to make a process, and you have to get involved. And learning is a similar thing. When you're exercising, you're building up resistance, you're breaking down muscles to build them back differently, and in some ways you have to unlearn. When you're learning, you have to question what you thought you've always known. That doesn't mean you have to change what you think you've always known. It just means you have to question it. You have to be open to hearing other perspectives from it. And so I think really, I talk about owning privilege sometimes. You have to own your privilege. It wasn't earned, but you can't give it back either. You know what I mean? And so you can't say, well, I'm a male, and men are in the majority in this country in terms of power. So I think I won't be male anymore. That's not how that works. It's that you have to recognize that you are working within a system that privileges you on that count. And how can you then use that and move about the world in a way that might make things more equitable for folks who don't identify as male, on that one case, for instance. So, but it's hard because it comes with the acknowledgement that everything you've gotten so far might not be solely because of your talents and hard work. I think that's a very difficult thing. It was certainly hard for me to wrestle with somebody who I felt like, I didn't come from privilege. My parents didn't go to college. We lived in a neighborhood we couldn't afford, so I could go to a decent high school. And I feel like I didn't have, but when I recognized, there's lots of ways throughout my life that I wasn't disadvantaged because of my gender, because of my sexual orientation, because of my race, because of the fact that I'm neurotypical. All those things together, in addition to my hard work and whatever talents I might have, has helped to get me where I am. So there's no shame in sort of recognizing that, but I think at first it's uncomfortable because, the Horatio Alger story is alive and well in the United States, and we all like to listen to politicians sometimes. No matter how rich their family they came from, they're all going to tell you a story about somebody who came off the boat from nothing and fixed shoes in the basement of the restaurant in the town they grew up in. Everybody's got some story like that because that's our narrative. But if we can just acknowledge that we don't all start from the same place, and where we have privilege, we should use it to make it better for those who don't.
Yes, fantastic remarks. Thank you so much. I was going to ask, is privilege a bad word? Is it, inherently something to be ashamed of? Because I think it comes with that kind of charge associated with it when I've heard it discussed, and that initial sort of defensive reaction is saying, well, but that doesn't define who I am. I think it's important, as you've said, to recognize that, once you get past the initial shock maybe of acknowledging and appreciating that there are some advantages that you inherently have by way of certain aspects of your identity, that does not invalidate all the rest of the aspects of your identity, but it gives you something to work with and to find empathy and allyship from.
That's a really good point. It's relative privilege. And I think anytime the word privilege surfaces, we all would be well to interrupt that conversation and make sure to modify it with relative privilege. Because if you leave it as an absolute, nobody's privileged, right? The Trump children will point out some way, that they, because even though they grew up really, really rich, there's going to be something that they feel disadvantaged them in some way. So it's not because you say you have privilege in this particular area or in this aspect of the identity wheel that you're privileged as a whole, and therefore you have no right to complain about anything. Everything was handed to you in life. You had a pathway. If we're going to start with that, it's a straw man argument, right? I mean, it's not valid. It's with respect to others who are similarly situated. This part of my identity affords me some privilege that I didn't earn.
Yes.
And that's a longer sentence. It's not a cute soundbite. It's sophisticated, right? That's the way we have to grapple with these things.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Linda, I'm going to ask if you can bump us forward 2 slides. The next one here was just about marginalization and privilege, which we've talked about here for a little bit. And so I'm going to move on to this. I think this is our final slide, actually. And it's called Think and Reflect. And I hope we can do some of that in real time here itself. But just as we've said that this is a process, it is a journey, I do hope that some of these questions and concepts linger with you for a while after this session is done, and that you might even find opportunities to reconnect with some of your fellow participants and revisit some of the things that have been passing through your mind or that we've been talking about out loud. So the first question here, are there aspects of the physical or social work environment that inhibit you or potentially inhibit other people from feeling supported to be whole and authentic, right? So we just came off of the question that said, how does having a good understanding of your own social identity allow you to bring your whole self to work? But now we want to explore, what factors might be at play that are preventing you or stymieing you from being able to do that, or for others as well. And Dr. Caliendo, can you speak to maybe if there's a personal experience you've had or work that you've seen done or have been a part of doing that gets at this question?
It's hard to point to specifics because it's so all encompassing, right? I mean, I think, and I don't mean that from my own life. I'm saying as all of us are reflecting on this now, it's hard to think back. Well, last week, what happened at work? Was there a thing? If you have a marginalized identity, you probably can find something, even last week, related to that thing. But to the extent that you're in a privileged portion of whatever identity you might be thinking about, it's hard to know because it's sort of it's sort of just in the atmosphere, and then it's hard. Fish don't know they're wet, sort of thing, right? It's all there. And so it's a chicken and egg problem, though, right? We want to surround ourselves with people who are comfortable enough to challenge us and to point out that we might not be, attending to whatever privileged position we might have sometimes. You have to be humble. You have to have a lot of humility to accept that sort of feedback. But you also have to create an environment where folks feel comfortable doing that. And it's hard in organizational dynamics because they're hierarchical. There's bosses, you know what I mean? And it's like, you don't want to make the boss mad, but sometimes the boss needs to surround herself with people who push back and without fear. You can do it in a polite way, but you have to do it in a direct way and say, I don't think you're thinking about it from this perspective. The problem is, if everybody around the table, if you don't have a very diverse group of people around the table, you're not going to get that from lived experiences. So then you got to hope that people are out doing the work, and that's a hard thing. The chicken and egg part of it is we can't ask people in a marginalized group to do all that heavy lifting for us. Sure. In other words, they have to teach us constantly, because that's exhausting. It's exhausting. And so to the extent that we have privilege in an area, it's really our responsibility to seek out and learn on our own to try to get better. Ask questions of folks who are in a marginalized group with respect to that privilege, and interact with them meaningfully, but after showing that we're trying, that we've done the work. We're not expecting them. So often in our organizations, we put together task force or try to make committees diverse or whatever. And then the idea is, well, put the women there and make sure that they're doing the women's stuff, and put the Black and brown folks there and make sure that they're attending to. That's not going to get it done. It's better than not having them there at all, for sure, because it's going to be a better process that emerges, but it's exhausting to folks in marginalized communities to always be asked to do that work, unless they can see that folks that have privilege in those areas are also working alongside.
Sure, absolutely. And that gets at the other question here that's on the slide, is what does it really mean to be an ally or an advocate, right? To utilize those aspects of your identity that put you in a position of privilege to speak on behalf of those, or to act on behalf of those, or with those who are in a lesser position in some way, or facing setbacks that perhaps you yourself did not face. Can you speak to, you'd mentioned that, you know, the hierarchy that often exists in a workplace environment. You know, where does this work happen in the hierarchy, from the top down or the bottom up, or some combination of the two? How do we take this and go back to our organizations and know where to begin?
It can be both. I think it's very powerful in both ways. But when, you know, when top people in a company say we're going to commit to this, and our budgets are going to reflect a commitment to this, our hiring processes are going to be more meaningful, and we're going to have training to make sure that we're bringing the right people in and creating an inclusive environment. But even if it's, you know, encouraging people to attend webinars. I mean, the one thing about COVID is there's really a lot of amazing lectures available to us electronically that we'd have to move around the country to take advantage of now. I counted just the other day, and just since January 1st, I've attended 24 different webinars on diversity, equity, inclusion related events, besides the work that I'm doing at North Central, like not even including the stuff that I'm sort of responsible for, but just from all over the country, because people are just throwing their Zoom links all over, and you get to hear smart people talking to you about stuff. To, you know, sharing those with your coworkers and say, hey, tune into this, or let's all tune in, and then maybe we'll come back and have a conversation about what we thought about it. It doesn't have to be every day or even every week, but when they'll take cues from the top. And for folks who aren't in the top of their organization, to ask those questions and say, is there ways that we could do more of this? I really want to learn, I want to grow. And I think our organization would be better if we were able to do it. And one of the things that came out of my small group, which was, you know, a wonderful group, by the way, I got moved in the middle, so I'm sure my first group was fantastic too, but the group that I was in ended up being great. And we learned that, you know, when people come into our lives that have an identity that's different than ours, particularly marginalized identity. So we had one person, for instance, who married into a family with a stepchild who was of color, a white person who married into a family with a stepchild of color. We had another family with a transgender daughter. Right. And so the person said, well, I never really thought about gender identity or sexual orientation primarily through my life. But then when my daughter's moving through this, now I think about my own a lot. Right. So the question becomes, how can we instigate ourselves? It's not going to happen to somebody we care about and love deeply like a child all the time. But how can we reach out and try to learn? And one suggestion I gave was all the bad things about social media, and there's lots of bad things about social media. One thing that can be helpful is you can learn from people that you don't know. And Twitter, I think, is probably the best for this. You can follow a lot of really smart people and in some ways eavesdrop on conversations. I shared that I follow a lot of Black intellectuals on Twitter, some of whom I know personally and some of whom I don't, but I'm watching them talking all the time and listening. And I don't have to interact. It doesn't matter what I think most of the time. But I'm watching and I'm listening and I'm learning and I'm challenging myself to think about things differently, because the way we're organized in terms of our housing, in terms of our workplace, our social gatherings, it's pretty homogeneous, right? We're mostly around people that are like us to the extent that we have privilege. If we're in a marginalized group, we're not around people that are like us a lot. But then again, those folks have to do so much of the heavy lifting. So anyway, I'm just trying to give some examples of ways that we might expose ourselves. It doesn't have to be a big aha moment. I mean, I think many of us did have a documentary or a book that we read where it was like, that's where the light bulb went off. That's when I really realized it. But don't hold out for that. And even after that one comes, again, that's why you got more work to do after that. So process.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So it kind of ties back to your earlier comment on you never stop learning in this regard. Like cultural competence is not a destination, but that it is a repeating mile marker along the way. You know, you mentioned that there are resources out there, and I guess I can use this as an opportunity to plug the DEI committee's work on pulling together lists of books and movies and just other media that are out there, authors to follow, whether it's on Twitter or elsewhere, to begin to pull in more of this insight and expose yourself actively. That's the other thing that I got from your comments there, Dr. Caliendo, was that this is not a passive effort. It's not about waiting for an event to happen or waiting for someone to come up and tell you what you need to know, but that this is really a very conscious, intentional process that each of us needs to engage in directly, to go out and seek the information and to pursue the connections with individuals who are unlike us. And what I think is yet to be found through that process is that you actually find you have quite a great deal in common with those people who appear to have differences in how they identify or their life experiences, that there is still something common to be shared with them, and to build that connection based on the diversity that exists in our world and in our communities. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Nate, but not first without thanking Dr. Caliendo. Thank you so much for the insights that you have shared, with the advice that you've given us, and of course, once again, to all of our breakout room facilitators for helping the small group discussions. I'm going to turn it over to Nate Alberti, who is our program chair for the DE&I committee, to help us wrap up.
Thank you, Mina. Thank you, Dr. Caliendo. Thank you for joining this discussion, and thank you for all the feedback that you provided throughout the process. I think today was a very powerful activity. I want to thank Mina for bringing this to our attention. This was something that she went through and she brought to us. And this is all part of what we are trying to do as we just go through, just going back with Judge Cornelius, how he told us to see, speak, stay, stand, and study. Something Dr. Caliendo mentioned was the study part. He asked if this was in order, because he said, hey, you don't have to wait to study, it's not a step-by-step process, but it is an ongoing journey. And I want to thank everybody that's here today for being part of this journey as we go through this and we learn these very important topics. I hope you'll join us in July as we'll have another listening session, and also in October as we'll have another program. I'll probably be a little bit, I'll give a little spoiler alert. There's going to be food involved, so everybody loves food. So yeah, with that said, again, just thank you to the chamber, for Linda, and just everybody in the DEI committee. Also, one thing to be aware of, we're going to start, sharing more resources, as Mina said, on our website. So if you go to the chamber website, there's going to be more resources. There's actually going to be a toolkit that we're going to put on there eventually. And in addition to some of the other, this program today is going to be on the chamber website eventually. So thank you all and have a good week.
Thank you.